You can do it. All right, we should be live. We're here. We've done it, theoretically. So I'll give people in the chat just a hot second to make sure that they can see us. So if somebody in the chat would post. Yep, perfect. We're good to go. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for coming. So I'm going to introduce our panelists, and we'll kind of get started here. But if you are here for the panel on the SFF Awards in the 2010s, a retrospective. I'm here with a number of fantastic and amazing panelists. Just to let you know who I am, I'm Shaun Duke. I am one of the people behind the Skiffy and Fanty Show. If you're watching, you happen to be on our BookTube channel right now. So, but that's all I will say. I will throw it over to Jeannette. Would you please tell us who you are?
Hello, my name's Jeannette Ng. I wrote a book called Under the Pendulum Sun. It's all right. I'm wearing a stupid crown because I won the Astounding last year, formerly known as the Campbell, and this is the last time I'm allowed to wear the crown in public, and because I've never actually received the official crown due to convoluted logistical reasons, I've got this cheap one from the internet as a substitute. So I'm afraid I'm going to lord it all over you, just very briefly, at least in the visual dimension right now. Sorry.
Awesome. And Bogi, how about you?
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Bogi Takács. I'm a Hungarian Jewish person currently in Kansas. And I'm a finalist for Best Fan Writer and have been for the past 3 years, I think. And I also write and just had a short story collection titled The Trans-Space Octopus Congregation. I think this is it in a nutshell.
Awesome. Usman, how about you?
Hello, everyone. I'm Usman Malik. I'm an intermittent writer of speculative fiction. And I actually, well, I suppose I should talk about it now. I have my debut collection coming out in Pakistan this early 2021. It's going to be called Midnight Doorways, Fables from Pakistan. That's me.
Fantastic. And lastly, Didi.
Hi, I'm Didi Chanoch. I'm a translator, a publisher, but on hiatus right now from Israel, formerly purchasing editor for a couple of publishing houses here. And yeah, I'm way too interested in science fiction awards.
Well, that's perfect because that's what we're here to talk about. So I want to start with somewhat of a more general question because we're talking about an entire decade of awards, and that's a daunting task for what is essentially an hour-long internet panel. And so I want to start with really a question about how do we begin to make sense of or understand what the 2010s of the award season actually means? Like, what is the big takeaway of the 2010s? And I will kind of go down the same direction, and then we'll kind of mix things up at how we start. I'll start with Jeannette. What's your big takeaways from this decade?
I feel like there's been a bit of a paradigm shift in terms of what the award is for, who we want to listen to, who we want to be the face of the genre, and I think that's. And the change has been a long time coming. I don't want to pretend it just all happened, but a decade itself is a reasonably long time. But we've got various waves of pushing. You've got the Puppies and its many incarnations. You've got new awards springing up around that, both good and bad. And obviously we've now got kind of like we also had a reckoning around the people we are honoring in terms of our awards, in terms of the names. There's the statue of Lovecraft no longer being a thing, and obviously with my own speech last year with changing the Astounding, changing the award to Astounding. But obviously I'm not alone in that. It's also been it's a lot of this has been a lot of time coming. People we've had a lot of, and it's not just in SFF that we're kind of having this moment of recalibrating, saying, wait, all this legacy stuff, maybe we want to get rid of some of it, maybe we don't like some of it, and that's all good. there's just a lot more work to be done, and there's constant pushback. Like a lot of the commentary around the various speeches, like NKJ's one's very quite famously, for example, like a lot of commentary around the performance of the award ceremony, like at least to me, I've been very aware of, where like, you know, you have to perform some kind of gratitude, and what is this for? I think we've also glammed up a bit more. I think we used to be my impression of the nerd prom used to be much more nerd and less prom, but that might just be me. Not that nerds or proms are inherently opposed concepts.
Oh, fair enough. All right. What about you, Bogi? Do you want to kind of respond to any of that or add anything?
Yes. I strongly agree with Jeannette that there has been this kind of push and pull when it comes to inclusion, and people are going like, this is too much or this is not enough, back and forth. And one thing that made me wonder when I looked at like the panel description is that the 2010 starts in 2010, but that means that we are cutting off one of the big discussions in fandom that happened in 2009, and which affects the whole outcome and everything that is specifically Race Fail 09. And so I was kind of like, okay, this is like technically not the 2010s, but its effects ripple through genre, I would say even since then. And of course, this was just one thing, and I wouldn't go like I agree with Jeannette that it's not like, oh, there's this one thing or one moment. I really strongly disagree with that, because there are people who have been working on inclusion with respect to various different minority groups for decades in SFF. So, but I feel like there has absolutely been a change, and many of these sometimes multiple decade-long efforts are kind of bearing fruit, so to say. Yeah, so maybe that's for starters.
Okay, great. Usman, why don't you jump in here? What do you kind of take from the 2010s?
A few years ago, I read this history book. It was, to be honest, it was really a condensed history book because I just wanted to know really what the history of the world was all about. And there was this comment by the historian in his introduction where he said that a lot of people think that 9/11 was a huge changing moment and the world will never be the same since. And this historian had an argument with that hypothesis, and he said the world is not just limited to this. It was a big moment, but this is not the biggest moment ever. So I think about awards in the same way. I think about a lot of these discussions in SF fandom the same way. For me, I often think that the SF fandom is so Euro and America centric that all the discussion happens in a very small echo chamber. And no offense to SF fandom, but I think that if you come to Asia, if you come to India, South Asia, Bangladesh, Pakistan, the conversations are very different. The power struggles are very different. So the world has been getting better for a long time overall. I mean, I'm not dismissing issues of climate change or the pandemic or the apocalypse that's upon us. But overall, in history, the world's been becoming a better place. And I think from 2010 to 2020, the overall trend has been towards betterment, not worsening. And the shift of power that's happening that Jeannette and Bogi were talking about, it's very clear, it's very evident, it's very exciting to watch. But I think as a writer who sometimes writes SF, I do like to pause and sort of imagine that maybe we should be thinking about even bigger and better things. As for example, one of the things I would like to talk about is how do we bring this idea of SF to places that really don't view it through the same lens. So SF awards are getting better. We have exciting, amazing, brilliant writers coming forth, and the ideas are just exploding. But I still think there's so much work to be done.
Oh yeah.
I think it's pretty much my comment on the trend.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to come back to this because I think that the comments so far have given me a lot to think about regarding the question I have about how awards represent values. But I want to make sure Didi gets a chance to respond to this initial question before we jump into that. So Didi, any thoughts about the 2010s you'd like to share?
In addition to mostly agreeing with what people have said, I will mention that the summation of most Jewish holidays can be, they tried to kill us, we survived, let's eat. And certainly in the case of the Hugos in the 2010s, it's a little bit, they tried to kill us, we survived, let's read. I think there was again, a big power shift that came with a lot of pain. And but I do think that we are in a much, much, much better place than we were a decade ago. And that is something that I think we should celebrate here.
Absolutely. So we're definitely going to come back to the sort of well, we're kind of there now, actually, because a lot of the comments so far that have been made have to do with this idea of, how awards might represent the values of a community, or whether that is the values in terms of social or political, because in some way the awards do have an effect there, but also what we value in terms of literary output or film output as well. And so I wanted to kind of get us to talk about, thinking about this shift and how the awards have come to represent different values over time, or how we think that awards in this period represented values, whatever values those might have been, whether they're our own or other people's, or challenges to values. So I want to start with Usman, because I think this is what made me immediately think to go there.
So I'm sorry, is your question about the SF awards and how people's values about them have changed? Am I understanding you correctly?
I was thinking more in terms of how the awards themselves represent values, whether that's literary values or personal values, which they can be one and the same, but I see them as somewhat separate.
So, one of the things that I think that I would probably, the thing that immediately comes to mind is about the aesthetics of awards, right? About the aesthetics of art or literature. And I have been thinking about this for a long time. I'll give you an example. I recently read a story. I thought it was a wonderful, lovely story. Some colleagues did not think it was a good story, and they did not feel compelled by it. And it started me thinking as to what the aesthetic value of the story for me was to me compared to them. And then I realized that the cultural landmarks, the historical context, the nostalgic, the evoking of nostalgia, the regression into childhood, all those senses of wonder, all those powerful tools at the writer's in the writer's arsenal, they are very different and they apply differently to different audience. And so an American writer, or an American reader is never going to respond to a story the same way as a Pakistani might to a story written by a Pakistani immersed in Pakistani history or mythos. The same way, a story that's set in the Philippines is not going to respond, be read the same way in the Philippines as it might be in the West or in the UK or the US. So I tend to think about awards the same way too. You're in the 1930s, or in the 1940s. You've got John Campbell, you've got Lovecraft, you've got all these people, and they have this idea of literature that is completely either created by their own niche of people interested in that genre, or the literary critics of the day, or even the opposition, the counterculture, right? And so their aesthetics are going to be very different. So the way they envision an award is not going to be the same as it's going to be envisioned 40 years later. That happened with the World Fantasy Award. When it was first set up in the 1970s, I believe originally it was supposed to, be an homage to H.P. Lovecraft. But the award's symbolism has since really evolved much farther and farther out. It is not about HPL anymore. It is about the world of fantasy. It's about fantasy all around the world. It's a global thing. Yeah. It's a tree with roots going all across the globe. So that's how, I hope that helps answer maybe some of your question.
Yeah, I think that definitely gets us in the direction I was thinking about. I see Bogi kind of nodding. Do you want to jump in here?
Yes. I have also still been thinking about Usman's previous answer and question about like what can we do more and how can we do even more. And this made me think about translations where I've seen a very strange trend, or maybe completely unstrange trend, is that in the past couple of years, I feel like literary translation awards have gotten much more inclusive of speculative works altogether, but speculative awards have not really had such a parallel increase in translated works. Now, obviously, these translated works are pretty good if they are being finalists for general literary awards or even winning them, but they're often like not marketed as SFF altogether, and also just completely like bypass the entire attention of English language SFF fandom. And I know that there has been a lot of back and forth about whether like should there be an SFF translation award in particular, what should it be like, etc., etc. And it's difficult. I feel like juried awards, like the Otherwise, which has recently been renamed, have like a place there, because when there's a jury, it's not going to come down as much to like, okay, this is the book that has been marketed, and this is the book that everybody got a review copy of. This is the book that everybody could like see promoted on their Goodreads, etc. But I feel like overall there's just such a way to go about translations in particular. So this is kind of like just one aspect of this really big question, but it's one that I kind of wanted to highlight.
Didi, I know you're also a translator. Did you want to respond a little bit here too?
Yeah, I had a couple of things. First, this was the first decade in which a translated novel won this novel Hugo,
Sure.
which is a pretty big thing.
Yeah.
You know, there's definitely been progress that's being made. I'd also want to note that we did have for 3 years Science Fiction Translation Award in the early parts of this decade. That Cheryl Morgan and others were involved with, and you know, it didn't gain a lot of steam, and the people who started it felt like they were pretty much the only people doing anything with it, and they ran out of time and energy, and so it died. But there was a bit of a nascent progress towards that, and I also see a lot more science fiction being translated into English. You know, obviously, science fiction in English has been getting translated into many languages this whole time, but we've seen the other way started. We've seen Ken Liu's work in this regard has been incredible, and also did result in that first Hugo for the Three-Body Problem. We're also seeing, you know, authors like my pal from Israel, Karen Lantzman, and her book, The Heart of the Circle, getting translated. So we're definitely seeing progress. Is it enough? No. Do we need to do a lot more? Sure. But that's going to be a theme.
Yep.
For the whole panel. Like, what can we do to improve things? More. Jeannette, I wanted to throw this to you if you wanted to kind of respond to these elements that are brought up, or you wanted to take it a slightly different direction with regards to values.
I think with regards to values, I think we are, at least to me, I'm seeing more people treating the awards as not not giving a crown or giving like a celebration of something that they already love. That's something they're already a fan of. Like, I don't know, Wheel of Time. We want Wheel of Time to win an award. We want Game of Thrones to win an award because we love it, kind of thing. Like, I feel like there's I've seen, at least I feel like there's less of that, and we're kind of I feel like we're more into the sort of, or maybe it's just me, and I see more of that kind of feeling of we want to push ourselves to find something interesting, and that kind of that and sometimes even the kind of feeling of like, I feel like this should win. I at least I saw that a lot with, and narcissistically, perhaps it's just because I was reading a lot of people talking about me, but a lot of people said, oh, I feel like Jeannette should win because it's such a beautiful written book, and I'm really excited about she's going to come next, but I don't think it's a very good book in and of itself. Like there's this kind of rhetoric of excitement and promise and pointing the way, even if and that's, I don't think that's necessarily bad, even if sort of kind of overcoming their own, what they perceive to be their own personal disengagement with something, in a sort of like, this is really good, even if, and I think more people should look at it, even if I did not personally connect with it, kind of attitude I've seen more. And I feel like that's something that I feel like I wouldn't see like a decade ago as much.
Interesting. I'll have to think about that a bit more, because I don't know that I noticed that, but I also wasn't looking at it, and you have obviously a personal connection to that in a way, which I think is really interesting.
I will note that I'm probably
Shaun,
particularly attuned to that for some reason.
Sure, absolutely. Usman, yeah, if you'd like to jump in, please.
No, something Jeanette said really struck me. Recently I was reading this book, and I realized it was a good book. It was a fun book. The book was not for me, and so I would not be the person who would ever want to be in a place where I had to review it or to make comments about it, because the book is not just it's just not something that really connects with me. And I think Jeanette was absolutely on the mark about that. That separation, I think. There are people who recognizing that, and I don't know if people would have done the same thing 20 years ago, or maybe my lens is just too narrow to really appreciate that.
That's interesting, yeah, because you're right. There is an aspect of being able to recognize the quality of something, even though you don't necessarily connect with it in the way that others might have, which I think is really interesting. And we could dive into that, but that leads to a whole other can of worms. So I will save that kernel of interest for elsewhere. But I did want to take this as an opportunity, because we can't really talk about the 2010s without dealing with its problems. And I think, based on Didi's face, that he's guessing where I'm going with this, because the 2010s are, of course, the era of the puppies for the Hugos, and some very, I mean, this led from, Usman was talking about power dynamics a bit ago, and it made me immediately think, well, this is in fact an aspect of power. There's essentially a fight was being had over what the award was going to represent and who was going to have a say in that award. And now that we're in 2020, it's been a couple years since that has been a omnipresent threat on at least for the Hugos. I'm really curious of how you guys see it in retrospect now. Now that we're here, we're in. I mean, I get that it's 2020 and it's the nightmare year from hell, but So I will start with Didi, because you made a face, and so.
Yeah, I think that the puppies, sad or rabid, were the dying screeches of the former power, which is still the power in the world, but is less so in science fiction. And we all probably know the quote about that when you're used to privilege, equality feels like oppression. Which is exactly the position that was expressed by these people. They saw works that they do not support getting nominated and winning, and that freaked them out, because isn't this ours? There's this strong feeling of ownership that some people have, and I personally view ours as being a broader word. And so, yeah, it was a dire threat. There were a couple of really weird years, but I do think we're in a much better place. I have said a bunch of times. I think this year's best novel, Hugo Slate, is the best one ever, and I've gone through the lists. I've looked. I think 70 was pretty good, but I think that this one is going to, when looked on in 20 years, is going to hold up really, really well. So yeah, we've been through this attempt to narrow down, and we've reacted by widening out, and I think we have a much broader spectrum being considered, and therefore also getting nominated and winning in our awards.
Absolutely. So I guess I want to kind of broaden this too, because I know that Usman, you were talking about like the World Fantasy Award, and Jeannette, you may have had a hand in the changing of an award name. Very possible. Yeah. And so I want to kind of broaden this just a little bit, because obviously if we're thinking in terms of what Didi is talking about, this notion of the sort of last dying grasp of an older breed, as it were, award changes are part of that, because there's a fight over maintaining tradition, etc. So I wanted to throw it to Jeannette, and then we go to Usman, and then we'll go to Bogi. If you want to kind of think about this in terms of how we represent the awards by their names, or in the case of the World Fantasy, by the bust, because this is, I think, part of that same fight happening in the 2010s.
I suppose I see the fight very much related to the larger kind of geek fandom fights around things like Star Wars, Gamergate, Comicsgate. It's all incredibly tedious, and when you're in the middle of it, incredibly unpleasant. Really, and it's hard to see it as entirely over. It just feels quiet to me. But that's just probably my nerves speaking. Because I know I wrote a stupid article about a children's TV show, and I'm aware that that got linked to on a Gamergate forum or something, and it's just that kind of awareness that kind of puts you a little bit on edge. So I'm very reluctant to ever say we've won, even though it is definitely quiet now, and it feels like we've settled down a little. I think a lot of the problem with things like the award names and things is that we get complacent. I've told the story many times before that I got on stage and said, Campbell's a fascist. I didn't expect it to be a controversial thing to say, which I know sounds really, really weird, but I thought we all knew. It's on his Wikipedia page. People have been saying it for years. It's not a secret. And it's one of those feelings where I didn't do it to change the world, because I thought I should probably just say it because it's true. And I thought it was one of those things that we all knew and we're okay with it. And what was great is that I said it and it reminded everyone go, yes, actually, we aren't okay with it. But I think and I think to a certain extent, some of the house cleaning right now feels like a sort of waking up of realizing, oh, all these things that we've kind of taken for granted, all these things have kind of almost blended into the background. They're not just, and you could kind of say the same about, say, I don't know, statues in marketplaces or whatever, that they have a very similar effect where you stop seeing them until you see them again, and then you go, oh fuck, we should do something about it, and everyone going, it's not a secret, it's on the plaque kind of level. So that's
thank you. It's a really interesting insight into that. Yeah. Well, why don't we throw it over to Usman? Did you have anything you wanted to kind of add here?
I haven't had much of a. I've not been in that sort of a difficult position that Jeannette is describing. I can only imagine how horrific it must have been. I will say this: in 2012, I I had just entered the horror and science fiction world. I had no idea that there was actually a real world out there. I thought I was just a freak writer. So I entered this world, and then through some coincidence, I actually I became part of the circle of some of the puppies, actually. And so as things evolved, and as I evolved, I started realizing the kind of things that were floating around. I will say this, the folks who led the puppy efforts, I mean, most of you know who they are, so I'm not going to name them, but they're interesting because a lot of them are libertarians. And recently a conservative commentator from the New York Times resigned, and after resignation, she put out this idea that, when I was in grad school, I started noticing this infiltration on campus of people who were intent on suppressing free speech. And, then there's always the question that Didi was recently talking about, that, equalization is not really oppression. And you've been screaming about free speech for decades, and now when this free speech is not to your liking, all of a sudden it is suppression, not free speech anymore. And that's the point this commentator was making. And the puppies were doing the exact same thing. I don't see it different from that broader paintbrush at all. You have these folks who don't want the government involved in anything, who don't want anyone telling them what to do, and then they're creating a damn slate and telling everyone to go vote for that slate. So there's so much hypocrisy in that stance and position. Even if one were to look at those awards, those books for the book's sake, it just leaves a nasty taste in your mouth by association. That's my only comment on this. I'm not sure that I'm in much of a position to say that we won or lost. I don't think I think that's irrelevant at this point. I think the intent is to keep things interesting, authentic, broader, more inclusive. Make the world of SF more interesting and a better place.
Strong agree. All right, Bogi, I want to give you a chance to respond to all this before we move on to what I hope will be a slightly more happy question, because I know this is the dark side of the awards. So
yeah, so I feel that I agree with Jeannette that right now there's a kind of lull in this, but that it absolutely comes and goes. That means it also tends to come back. And I see this quite acutely because I'm both active in English language SFF and also Hungarian language SFF. And the peaks of this kind of are completely desynchronized compared to each other. So when I'm oh, okay, now it's settling it down in the English language groups of my Facebook, and then it's flaring up in the Hungarian language SFF groups in my Facebook, or vice versa. So it's not I feel there's always some topics that I have to avoid in certain contexts because I know that a flame war is going to happen. It's just different topics at different times. So that's one of the things I wanted to say. And I also wanted to say something completely different, just a bit going back to what Didi said about how Cheryl Morgan and others were trying to set up a translation award. And how that I feel there are a lot of efforts that happen and are awesome, but people are not necessarily able to sustain just the humongous effort that's required. For example, when I started posting in English, the World SF blog, which was done by Charles Dunn and Lavi Tidhar, that was absolutely a thing. And then they also closed it after a couple of years. And right now, Rachel Cordasco is doing SF in translation and having even an audience poll, which is the closest I can think of when it comes to bringing attention to specific words works right now. And this made me think of completely different categories games awards and the YA awards, which people have been really pushing for more awards to contain these categories. and successfully pushing for them. I just don't know. I don't have like answers, but I feel like something to contemplate would be what is necessary for like a sustained effort to be successful. Because I don't know. I don't claim to have like the Philosopher's Stone, or I don't know. So I don't know about how to do it. But that's just something to think about. And that also circles back to the culture wars theme, is that if a group manages to like sustain an effort, then like that's what really causes change. Whereas if a group makes an effort, whether we conceive of it as positive or negative, but doesn't necessarily manage to sustain it, or feels it's too much effort to sustain it, like swimming against the tide, so to say, then that effort will just kind of fade out, and maybe it will come back with another wave, but I don't know. Yeah, so I think that's it for now. Mm-hmm.
I want to quickly jump in with the kind of the culture, because I kind of the culture war aspect, and sort of. And perhaps it's just the kind of gamer side in me, the kind of munchkin side, where I look at this and I feel like where Worldcon does affect who wins, because the voter base can change a lot between where it's held. And obviously there are people who are very dedicated voters who will vote or buy a voting. Well, Didi did, for example, but in general, I think that does. And I don't want this to become like a, Jeanette's kind of calling out specific people of, oh, you only won because it was in blah country, blah year. But, I'll happily say that I think I got a leg up because we were in Dublin. That was to my advantage. It was a home court advantage. And I'm not, and this isn't to disparage people who have won or say other people should have won, but I think that where can host, where has the means to host, where has a fan base to host, and that kind of knocks on, and I think that's quite an interesting thing to at least examine and think about, and what we can do or not do about it, at least in concept, because especially since we're starting to have conversations about non-Anglophone countries hosting.
Yeah, and I guess the other side to this would be like for juried awards, right? Who happens to be on your jury has an impact on what gets attention. And obviously there can be other aspects of that, like where the juried award is. So there's conversation now about the Booker, I believe, which requires like a £5,000, like you have to pay a fee to submit the work for I don't know exactly how it works, but there's money involved. Which obviously impacts which works might even be considered, because if you're with a small press, like they probably don't have £5,000 that they can just throw out for a work. So yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I mean, you're right that there's an element of who happens to be involved in an award process, whether it's fans or it is the jury or whatever, dramatically impacts what works get consideration, right? So perhaps if Chengdu bid for Worldcon wins, we might suddenly see more translated or maybe not translated works on the ballot, depending on how many people from that region perhaps join the Worldcon. I don't know. It'll be interesting. Yeah. No, go ahead, Jeanette. I'm sorry. Yeah.
But like, even within the Anglophone world, I think America does have very different tastes to, say, the UK. There are many people who will tell me about who will, after half a drink or so, will start talking about, their sales and go like, oh yes, all my sales are in America, or like, oh, all my sales are in the UK. All my sales are in the UK.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's take a shift to something slightly happier than Puppies and racists arguing that we should keep a racist bust and other kinds of problems, to maybe a thing that you found particularly that you really enjoyed about the 2010s, whether it was a change in an award or a moment in the ceremony. There's a question, I think, from Worlds in Ink in here that's about, like, you know, a favorite moment in award ceremonies, but something that for you is memorable about the 2010s, a moment, a change, a person winning, or something like that. Like, give me one, just chef's kiss, perfect. Didi, you want to go first, please?
The hat trick, the Broken Earth hat trick. Nora Jemisin finally being able to go on stage to be there for the third one, and the incredible speech and the whole thing. You know, I think it's such a landmark, incredible work, and the fact that it now has these 3 consecutive awards to back that up is just beautiful to me. It made me so happy.
Fantastic. What about you, Bogi?
It felt like a paradigm shift.
Yes. And also part of that paradigm shift was also Jeannette's speech. So I would absolutely want to add that, because there I was like, yes. So there was cheering. There was cheering for Jeanette's speech. This is true. Yep.
I was there. There was cheering.
Yep. And also, I would also like to say something that's kind of like behind scenes type of thing, is that this has been like the first time when I had been invited to be on awards juries. And I have seen that like some awards had specifically made like their guidelines. For example, the Lambdas have explicit guidelines. Okay, they're not an SFF award per se, but they do have an SFF category. And I juried in this category 2 years ago. So they have like explicit guidelines to avoid there being like the jury composed of being 3 white Anglo men or stuff like that. So that's one thing that I'm seeing as like a very like positive thing that was for me personally awesome, because I got like a pile of books to read. So that was like a kind of a standout thing for me that might not be visible from the outside. The juries where I was in, I was like by no means the only marginalized person in any sense, but juries tended up to be mostly marginalized people now that there is an explicit push against this. Of course, it has a little bit of a flip side, and the flip side is that this usually either doesn't pay or pays very little for the people doing the jurying. So this also becomes like another thing. Okay, we can get marginalized people to do this for like peanuts kind of thing. So that's like, I would point that out. Also, one more thing that really struck me, and this is something that's very visible for everyone, is that if you just go on Wikipedia and look at like who got Hugos in various categories, in some categories, there was a period where there were like the same 5 people or like 4 or 5 people nominated year after year after year. If you look at like the fan writer category, I feel like this is especially like I was shocked when I saw this, and this has very much changed. So I feel that even right now, and this goes back to what Usman said, there's like so much more to do and so much more change to like enact. But where the awards started from was just so incredibly different from where they are right now that like it was personally shocking to me. And when I did that, I rewrote my award speech that we had to record. I don't know if I'm gonna win, so maybe the award speech will be forever on my hard disk. But I changed it to have like a list of people who I would also like to see nominated for the award, because I feel like just, okay, we have come a ways, but there's still so much more to go. So yeah, that's just a couple of words for now. Yeah.
No, perfect.
I just want to make a tiny comment in response to what Bogi said, that I want to shout out Renee's Hugo spreadsheet of doom, which I think has been super helpful for people in expanding in categories like fan writer, because having a list makes people go, okay, let's check that person out, and I think that was very useful, especially in these categories.
Yeah, it's also really helpful for like the astounding, because of the rules of the astounding, right? You can only be eligible for a certain period of time, and it can be really hard to find that stuff. So I want to jump to Usman, and then I want to go to Jeannette. So Usman, is there a memorable moment for you from the 2010s?
One of the things that I noticed, one of the audience members put that question out there. The question was about horror awards and has horror become the forgotten stepchild in the speculative fiction awards pantheon. In the SFF conversation, horror is really not counted as part of the SFF fandom. I think it's a pity, because Ray Bradbury, going back to someone like Bradbury or Campbell or whoever, the Golden Godfathers, whatever you want to call them, they were as much into horror as they were into SF. And I'm not sure that a lot of them made that distinction back then. In the 1980s, because of commerciability and because of the fact that a lot of pulp writers came to the fore, try to make a quick buck, the bubble of horror burst. And by the end of the 1980s, horror was just, you didn't want to be called a horror writer anymore. You just weren't. You were a supernatural thriller writer or a dark fantasy writer. So I think for me, the best moment, as someone who's loved horror since I was a kid, I didn't even know that I liked horror. I remember this time when I was 14, and a friend from school visited me, and he looked at my bookshelves and said, "Dude, what's up with all the vampires and the werewolves?" And I looked at my shelves and I was like, holy crap, he's right. What is wrong with me? And that's when I realized I loved the grotesque much more than the arabesque. And I've sort of stuck with that love through the years. So seeing horror make a rebounding, it's just bounded back. It's made a resurgence in the last decade. It's gone from, I don't want to be called a horror writer, to now everyone wanted to put out a horror book and, become the next Bird Box or Paul Tremblay's Head Full of Ghosts, or now Stephen Graham Jones' Little, I'm forgetting the name of the book. Little Indians, I want to say, I'm sorry, I can't remember.
You mean the new one? The Only Good Indians.
Good Indians, thank you, I'm sorry. So seeing all these titles come out and these people really become powerhouses, it helps everyone. And I think for me, that is a watershed moment where I want people who like this to really kind of get back to their roots and say, if I want to do some horror, if I want to do some interesting Clive Barker sort of dark fantasy, horror, erotica, quilt bag, LGBTQ sort of fusion, I can do it with absolutely no worry about being labeled a gutter writer, which happened all the time in the early 2000s. So that was my big, again, I confess that's selfish to the horror lover in me, but that's one. The other one I will say is seeing, as a person who does identify strongly as a Pakistani origin writer, seeing the Pakistani SF scene explode in the last 3-4 years, and seeing this group coming up, 6, 7, 8 writers, and about 16, 17 speculative artists. It's just incredible. I didn't know that there was anyone doing this in Pakistan until the last couple of years. That's been really exciting. That's me.
That's awesome. That sounds fantastic. All right, Jeannette, you get the last say on this question before we move to some audience questions.
At least for me, one of the moments I enjoy the most is actually helped. I really like doing people's hair and makeup before the award ceremony. It was Mary Robinette Cowell organized the big kind of dolling up for the Hugos. I mean, I like the pageantry of things, so I really enjoyed doing people's hair and kind of just fussing around, and it made it feel more important. I'm just kind of rolling out of bed and showing up, and it kind of, I don't know, maybe it's just kind of flashbacks to preparing with your friends before going to the party or whatever. But it was really nice, and I really enjoyed it. And I got the impression, at least, that Mary Robinette Cowell was trying to bring more kind of that pageantry in general to the awards. That there was that there was at one point more of a kind of show up in your t-shirt and jeans, which is, again, always 100% cool, not a problem, not a criticism, but kind of make it that kind of party. And I like, and I enjoy it. I enjoy dressing up. Excuse to wear the dress.
And the hat
and
thing.
And a hat, and I do like hats too. I mean, I'm a live role player. I like pretending I like wearing stupid clothes. So I really, and I think that that gives, at least going to it, a certain feeling of like, oh yes, I feel all special. So I enjoy that.
Totally valid. That's awesome. Okay, so I want to take a couple of audience questions. So Adri has asked a really good question about your dream niche award. What would you pick if you could have any niche award? What would it be? And I want to start with Jeannette, unless you're not ready.
Not ready.
You need a hot minute. Okay, who would like to go first? Show of hand. Oh, Bogi got it. All right, we'll start with Bogi.
Yes, and I'm kind of gonna be cheating because my favorite award had already come to being, and then it went on hiatus, and people are trying to bring it back again. So I'm just gonna talk a bit about that. So my favorite award as a reader, I started like in like the late 2000s when I had more access to like English language SFF through the internet. I started reading like, okay, I'm gonna read the current stuff and whatever is available in English. And I very quickly determined that the award that like most closely aligned with what I enjoyed reading were the Carl Brandon Awards. For those who are relatively new, this was an award that focused on race in SFF, and it had two categories. One category was about topics of race by authors of any race. And the other award was for an author who belongs to a racial minority. And I just felt that the winners of this award were just stellar. Like they just kicked it out of the park. And I was very sad when the award went away. But right now, I think Nisi Scholl and a bunch of other people are trying to bring it back. So this might be a thing again next year or the year after. So I would just like encourage everyone to keep an eye on it, because like this was my favorite and it might be coming back now.
Awesome. I really hope it does. Who would like to go next with your dream award? Didi's making a face, so Didi gets to go.
Yeah, that was a face of an I don't know, because we, as a translator, obviously translation is interesting to me, but it is a super difficult thing to judge because to really judge a translation, you need to read both the original and translated work, and you're not going to be able to get a jury that reads all the languages, and it would have to be juried, because it is you're judging craft more than art, I think. So not that. Yes, my niche award is not translation.
Flash fiction. Flash fiction's really cool. And would be really fun to see to see more celebration of that. And the bonus is it wouldn't drastically increase the length of your Hugo reading list. Which I feel like is a good selling point for a lot of people.
Yeah.
I think because I'm kind of stuck again, a bit of a thing where I feel like I'm the odd duck out in the best related works, where we're seeing a lot of stuff which is quite relatively academic, and kind of biographies and memoirs show up in it, and I wonder sometimes if once they kind of show up in that category enough times, we should split them into their own category. Like video essays might be a place where we might, because that's a very active source of discussion and discourse on the internet. I mean, obviously, Lindsay Ellis's Hobbit geology got a look in the other year, but I think that I'm very into the video essays as well, so that would be cool. I'm seeing best booktube from the comments as well. I don't know if that would, because we do have best podcast now as well, so like it feels like in the same vein.
Yeah, and Claire has a booktube. So.
A bit biased, yeah, a little biased.
Not at all biased. I see.
Yeah,
and it's nominated for Best Fancast this year.
It is correct. Yeah. So, all right. So let's start to Usman. Do you have a dream award that you might want?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this option for a while. I really would like Worldcon and the Hugos to add Best Hugo for Best Science Fiction Outreach Effort to marginalized communities, to people who are not able to do any of that. And I don't think that any such award exists in the science fiction world. I think that is something to consider. Any program, any organization, any science fiction society, whatever, whoever do the best outreach to marginalized communities and make the best efforts to bring people into the fold.
Yeah,
absolutely. Okay, so I want to end on a looking forward note because we are in 2020, and I know that 2020 is not exactly the greatest year that we could exist in. It's been a little strange, to say the least. But I want to end on look. We just talked about a whole decade, and we talked about some changes. Things have been progressing. There's been some positives in there, negatives, but things moving in a direction. So, what are you hopeful for this decade for SFF awards or SFFH awards? We'll put the H in there as well. What makes you hopeful about this next decade of awards seasons? Who would like to go first? Don't make a face, Didi, or I'll pick you. Jeannette, please.
I slightly want to so Archive of Our Own obviously won last year, and that kicked off an interesting fight to me because it spotlighted a different kind of rift within the fandoms, because you have the kind of more fanfic online active, and you've got the kind of SFF fandom, which is, they're not the same. And obviously there were people who were there was a whole fight around badges and whether or not fanfic writers who were on Archive of Our Own were allowed to call themselves winners of the Hugo themselves, blah blah. What is the award for? It got very pedantic. I don't want to go into it, but I also think it's quite interesting because it did highlight a rift within our communities that isn't quite the same as the previous described kind of Puppies versus the everyone else. It was much more kind of pedants. Okay, pedants is the wrong word, but it wasn't the same rift, and it didn't feel like the same rift to me, and I thought that was, and I think I would like there to be space for us to examine those rifts and not be forced in a place where we're having to go, well, no, I don't agree with you 100%, but we've got to just team up right now because the big bad is coming. I think in general, there are a lot of differences I have with people who I very broadly agree with and have a lot in common with, that I do want to have the space to examine, but we don't have that space or that luxury to examine it because there is this bigger threat. And that bigger threat is very existential, so we've got to put that all aside, but we haven't solved those problems. We've just hugged it out for now. So I think that's one thing I look forward to.
Awesome. I think that sounds fantastic. Bogi, you're kind of nodding a bit. You want to give us your take?
Yes, and also just very quickly answer because it was asked in the sidebar, where can we support the Carl Brandon Award? The organization for that is the Carl Brandon Society, and they're on various social media and things like that, and check them out. So I just wanted to quickly interject that. And as for what I'm like happy about, I feel like that when I first started voting for the Hugos, that was, I think, in 2010 or 11, and it was part of an initiative that was started by Shweta Narayan to get more people who are outside from like the core SFF fandom to also vote on these awards. And that was when I started reviewing in English, because I felt that, okay, if people are like supporting me and giving me a membership, then I might as well actually like give back and review and tell people what I like. And I feel like there was a period when what I liked was very far from what ended up on the ballot. And I feel like it's still pretty far, but I have like super niche interests. But I feel like now when I'm looking at a ballot, I'm just feeling better. I don't know, and I would like feel like there's a whole panel's worth of discussion of whether this changes like linear or just comes like this. And I don't necessarily think that like this year's ballot is the best of all ballots, etc. So I don't know. I might be disagreeing with Didi, but I feel like we could disagree for like a whole other panel's worth. So there's that. But I feel like there's like hope for the future. But I very much agree with Jeannette that as long as we have to deal with, oh my God, we have to like deal with these big existential threats, then it's really hard to concentrate on anything else. And actually, this is how I felt like about the programming this year, is that just in the middle of the coronavirus and everything else and the political changes and how that affected our lives, I was like, oh my God, I don't even know if I'm going to be participating in anything because I'm just out of energy, I'm out of effort, I'm out of everything. And then I was basically dragged to here by a group of people, and I'm very grateful for that and the encouragement. And I feel like that's a happy note to end on because I'm here and I have been able to be here. So I'm very grateful for that. Thank you.
That is definitely a very, very good thing. So got to find the joy where you can get it.
I think so.
So Didi, is that a face?
Sure. My biggest reason for optimism is the fact that this year's first novel ballot finalist in the Locust is as good as either their best science fiction or best fantasy, and half of the best novel finalists in the Hugos are debut novels. We're getting a lot of great new people writing really good stuff, and that's, it's more reason for optimism about the genre, but that's what I got.
Perfect. No, optimism is appreciated. Art Usman, you get to be the last one. So give us your hope, your hopefulness for this decade for awards and related things.
First, I'm gonna say it's so lovely to see you, Bogi. I don't think I've ever talked to you face to face or Jeannette. Didi, I've met Didi once, and I've of course met Shaun. It's lovely to meet you all and listen to you, and thank you for being here. This is something that I'm really passionate about, I guess, or I think about a lot. I really would like both, folks who are on the progressive side of things and on the conservative side of things to really have more generosity of spirit. There should be more self-examination. There should be more generosity of spirit on both sides. And I say that as a diehard leftist, progressive, someone who wants change, someone who wants things to get better. But I just don't see that enough on either camp. So I really would like that to reflect and seep into the science fiction world as well as much as possible. The other thing that I've been thinking about, and I never thought of that 5 years ago, is I would like science fiction writers or writers or whoever, people who imagine for a living, to be maybe interact more with centers for science and imagination, centers for the environment and imagination, because I think we don't have much time left as a species, as a planet. I really, really believe that. I'm back in Pakistan after a decade of being in the US, and I'm at Karachi, the city that's on the coast in the south of Pakistan, just faced one of the worst flooding Karachi's ever seen. And I don't think in 10 years Karachi is going to exist as a city anymore. I think that science fiction writers really need to think about that and maybe actually engage more. We know that the US damn military is engaging with science fiction writers. We know that. So it may be a good idea for us to sort of work on the environment aspect of things and policy. If Newt Gingrich could do it, maybe some of us could also be in the corridors of power. So that is something to think about.
That's a very good thought to end our panel on. Thank you, Usman. Yeah, you're making me think a lot of. I was just watching a video. I believe Jakarta is essentially slowly sinking, and will eventually have to be moved. They're in the process of moving the capital. So that's something that, yeah, I agree. We need to be thinking more about. So, okay, well, we are past our hour. And I want to thank all of my wonderful panelists for all that you have done today and bringing your lovely selves and your great thoughts to this. You all are fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. And thanks all our listeners who are here and people who will eventually show up later and will not be watching this live. That's it. We're going to say goodbye. I'm going to end this broadcast. Go read some science fiction and fantasy and horror.
Cheers from Pakistan.
Bye-bye.
Bye.